I had no intention of going to a rehab or anywhere else these people might want to take me. My plan was to get off the plane and hit the streets. Yes, I was sick, and yes, I needed help, but the only kind of help I wanted was help getting out of town and then getting loaded. The next day, Rob met me on an agreed-upon street corner to pick me up. I convinced him to put one last loan on my tab and drive me to a dope house where I cooked up 4 shots and put the full rigs in my socks. I had him pull over on the way to the SeaTac airport and let me smoke a couple hits of crack in his truck. Then he dropped me off at the check-in counter. I hit the bathroom twice during the 3-hour flight, doing 2 full shots both times. I hadn't planned on getting so loaded, but I was suddenly overcome by exhaustion from all the previous years of running and gunning that by the time we landed, I was so high and worn out, I had trouble walking. I also hadn't planned on the huge security guy waiting to pick me up. Unable to get free, I unhappily followed him to his SUV, got in, and immediately passed out. "Hey pal, time to get up, let's go." I groggily rubbed my eyes and got out of the truck onto the sidewalk outside of what looked to be a nondescript office building in Hollywood, not the rehab facility I had anticipated. "Buddy wants to see you before we send you to a hospital." "Who's Buddy?" "Buddy Arnold, man," the driver laughed. "The guy who brought you here." We went upstairs where a friendly woman smiled at me. "Hello, Mark, we've been expecting you. Take a seat." About 15 minutes later, a thin, gray-haired dude in his early 70s bounded through the door. "Jesus Christ," he said with a big grin. "Look at you, man. We got you just in time. You are definitely in the right place." He took me back into his office and told me a little bit about himself. He had been a professional jazz saxophone player who had played with Buddy Rich, Tommy Dorsey, and the Stan Kenton Orchestra, among others. His career had been derailed several times due to his heroin addiction, and he had been in and out of the penitentiary for years. He pointed to a large, almost unrecognizable photo of himself on the wall. Shirtless and emaciated, with eyes closed and long greasy hair, he had obviously been deep in his crippling dependency. "I keep that there to remind me of where I've been, and where I never want to go again. I'm going to take a Polaroid of you. Hang on to it so you never forget this day." I sat shivering in my thin, long-sleeved shirt and filth-encrusted coat near a fountain outside the intake office of Las Encinas Hospital for what seemed like hours, waiting to be admitted. To kill time, I started talking to an elderly lady who sat near me on the bench, chain-smoking cigarettes. She seemed perfectly comfortable, dressed in an ancient, ragged bathrobe. "Excuse me, ma'am, but could I please have one of your cigarettes?" "You have one on your head, young man," she said. I put a hand to my head and did indeed find a partially smoked butt stuck up in my disgusting, never-washed hair. I must have traveled all the way from Seattle with it there. The next few days were lost in a hazy cloud of phenobarb-induced dreamscape horizons. I was aware of crashing wind and rain, a huge, ceaseless storm outside shaking and pounding the bungalow I occupied. I kept having the same dream over and over. Sitting in a chair in the same room where I slept through my kick, it would burst into flames. The walls, ceiling, and floor all at once, engulfing everything in fire, myself included. I woke only to get another dose of meds and go back under. I would come to from time to time and see a plate of food on the stand next to the bed, but would instantly roll over and pass out again. At some point, the nurse made me get up out of bed and get undressed. She put me on a stool in the shower where I sat dry heaving under the hot water for 20 minutes. So weak I was barely able to stay on the chair. Later, I became conscious of someone cutting my hair, but it seemed more like an imaginary midnight movie scene as I was sitting in a lawn chair, unable to lift my head off my chest. Late morning on the 5th day, I lay in bed in total darkness, slightly uncomfortable and unable to sleep all day now that I was being slowly weaned off the meds. There came a light knocking on my door. "Go away," I said. Now a louder knock. "Go away, I'm sleeping." The door opened a crack and a guy stuck his large round head in. "Hey man, how you doing? The nurses told me your story and it sounds a lot like mine. I'm Kenny." I raised up in bed about to go off on this fucking jerk when I saw his profile in the light. He looked familiar, but in a way I couldn't place. "I know you." Well, yeah, man, I'm a musician too. I was in a band called Autograph. That band name instantly cast my mind back to my high school days. I'd skip sixth period every day to go drink beer and smoke weed at Matt Barnum's house, getting him to listen to cassette tapes of my punk rock records and watching MTV with the sound off. Of all the terrible hair metal videos they aired, the one that particularly drew my ire was Turn Up the Radio by Autograph. I hated it so much that one day it had come on and I'd thrown a full can of beer at my friend's mother's TV set. After the storm subsided, I was finally able to shake off the imaginary steel band that had been threatening to make my skull implode. The beautiful California sun had emerged from behind the storm clouds, and an orderly had set me up in a lawn chair on the impeccably groomed, endless expanse of gorgeous green lawn on the hospital grounds. I sat there alone, basking in the not too hot, not too cool air. My hair was short and clean, as were my clothes. I had awakened one day to find my room filled with several bags of brand new clothes that Courtney had sent over. I felt more aware and alive than I could ever remember. I was no longer imprisoned by any drug, did not have to hit the streets and hustle. For the first time in years, I had nowhere to be at all. It was an exceptionally peaceful moment. I marveled at my incredible good fortune. I smiled, then began to laugh. Then laughed maniacally. I had escaped. I had survived. They had failed to destroy me, and I had woken up here in paradise. I'm still here, motherfuckers. You can't kill me, I howled hysterically at the sky. Before my sick crowing had even receded, an unwelcome truth lodged itself in my head. Anything that happens next can only be worse than what came before. That degree of suffering was beyond my imagination. My manic laughter turned instantly into uncontrollable sobbing. I hadn't cried in a long time. It felt as though the tears were being ripped from inside whatever I had that passed for a soul, clawed out from that lifelong aching place. I moaned and gasped, unable to catch my breath. Suddenly, spontaneously, out of a moment of abject despair, I said out loud, "God, change me." I had never believed in a traditional Christian God or in any supreme being. I had hated sitting through midnight mass, Catholic weddings, Catholic funerals, and especially those torturous Wednesday morning masses at the mission I was forced to endure before getting in line for soup and sandwiches. I didn't know who I was calling out to, but the second I cried out for mercy, I was nailed by some invisible but overwhelming force, as powerful and sudden as a shotgun blast. A surreal, instantaneous 16 hits of acid epiphany, as though I had pissed on an incredibly powerful electric fence. I was knocked from my chair and my life flashed before my eyes. My wasted childhood, my arrogant youth, my anger and obsessions, crime, delusions, self-loathing, paranoia, hopelessness, fury, and the sad, junky downward spiral. I'd heard that cliche a million times, my life flashed before my eyes, but I finally understood what that meant. In that single instant, it had been powerfully, intensely true, the most authentic experience of my entire life in 1 second on the lawn of a Los Angeles psychiatric hospital. Lying there, sobbing in the grass for the first time ever, I stared directly and honestly into the mirror of my life. In order to survive, in order to move forward, I would have to change every single fucking sorry thing about myself. I would have to start over again, clean. A few years later, I was recording in Houston with Randall Jamail, fulfilling my end of the bargain that had kept me out of tax debtor's prison. One night in my room at the Holiday Inn, I got a phone call from Lori Davis, my huge-hearted, long-suffering accountant, the only person from my time in the trees who continued to care enough to work with me. "Mark, please sit down. I'm so sorry, but I have some terrible news, and it's going to hurt. I'm so sorry." "Layne?" I asked. "Yes, honey, he's gone." It was a call I had expected for years, but it destroyed me nonetheless. His loss left a void I've felt every day since. I expect I always will.